country. And that way, when people talk about the fact that we need more study, we need more science, that you'll know what the real impediments are. So let me talk to you about just a little bit about my background. So I'm from Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been working with vets for about 20 years now. I practice internal medicine and psychiatry. I'm double boarded, and I also train service dogs. But obviously, it's important for you to know that I have no personal experience with marijuana. I've never tried marijuana in any formulation. I'm not part of the industry. I don't own dispensaries or write certifications for patients. I only care about the science. I'm committed to collecting objective data about how marijuana performs in human subjects. So this is also, you might be aware that I was an assistant professor at the University of Arizona College of Medicine for over 7 years in excellent standing until they removed me last year due to my political activism trying to get this study implemented. And that's one of actually my proudest professional achievements. I make no apologies about becoming politically active to try to change laws that I believe are detrimental to patients. So after being terminated from the U of A last year, we ended up receiving worldwide media attention. It was an incredible gift to we were able to shine a very big spotlight on the barriers to marijuana research, and we were very grateful to have folks like Sanjay Gupta, New York Times, all kinds of big mainstream media outlets talking about what the barriers to research are. And it was the best comeback story of 2014, that after being removed from the U of A, we ended up getting a partnership with Johns Hopkins University. We got a $2.2 million grant from the Colorado Health Department. We were one of the 9 projects that were funded through the CDPHE, and you can see these were the other illnesses that we're going to be studying. So as you know, the state health department allocated $9 million to 9 projects, and we were the highest point scorer because we have been the furthest along in terms of getting all of our federal approvals. This is our study. We are the only randomized controlled trial in the world looking at the use of whole plant marijuana for PTSD. So that's why we're so committed to getting this study underway, because we know that this is absolutely crucial. And I don't think you guys need any more. I'm sure you've all read the myriad of information about the immense incidence of PTSD in our population, particularly in soldiers returning from service. And you can see here, this is probably the best thing that came out of my being fired, was we got to shine a real spotlight on the epidemic of veteran suicide. And this is why I'm wearing this dog tag here with the number 22 engraved in it, because this was a campaign that a group of veterans started to try to build awareness in the public about this real public health crisis, where we have more veterans killing themselves from suicide than dying in active duty. And I think that this is part of why we're so determined to get this study, to try to answer questions about how does marijuana work, and is this another treatment for PTSD. This is also the reason why we care about this, because right now we only have 2 medicines on the market that have an actual FDA indication for PTSD. These are it. All we've got in our armamentarium right now is Zoloft and Paxil. So all the other meds that we use for PTSD are all used off-label. They don't have an FDA indication. Any of you who've tried these meds or have family members who've been on them, you know that these 2 meds have a ton of side effects. They often don't work. So many patients get on this and spend months titrating up their dose and never get any clinical efficacy. So this is really frustrating. Some of the top side effects of these meds are sexual dysfunction and weight gain, right? So what happens is, for instance, with Paxil, we do telemedicine with the Department of Corrections, and for pedophiles, we actually use Paxil deliberately to suppress their libido. And so what happens is these servicemen come back and they get diagnosed with PTSD, they get thrown on these meds, we end up making them fat and impotent, and you can imagine how disheartening that is for folks that are, these vets are trying to reintegrate into their families and communities, and they ended up getting pummeled with a variety of different prescription drugs, none of which work often. This is the other issue, we know about the incidence of PTSD amongst vets, the amount of homelessness. I'm also going to show you, this is a really important issue, the incidence of prescription drug overdose in this country is astounding. In Arizona, for instance, last year, we lost 1,700 people to prescription drug overdose, not just opioids. It's really important to emphasize that these are all the drugs that depress the central nervous system, right? So sleep meds, benzodiazepines like Valium, Ativan, all of them can suppress your breathing drive, and especially when they're used in combination. These are the combination of meds that we use in our veterans all the time. We prescribe, we give them Ativan and sleep meds that are addictive, and opioids and antidepressants, and you can see how quickly their list of meds snowballs into something that's completely unmanageable. It's like a gigantic polypharmacy. But we've been lucky that mainstream media have started talking openly about this epidemic of, prescription drug overdose. And the fact is that still we are looking for a single death associated only with marijuana. And the pharmacists, you look at the world of pharmacology, they still have not defined what we call the LD50, the lethal dose of marijuana, because apparently there is none. There is no lethal dose that's ever been documented. This is another important study that came out last year. Many of you saw this. JAMA, which is obviously one of the more mainstream medical journals, this is a peer-reviewed article talking about the fact that in the 23 legal medical marijuana states, a lower incidence of opioid overdose than in states that didn't have medical marijuana laws. So this is what it boils down to here, is that what we're doing to these vets now is pummeling them with all kinds of prescription meds that are riddled with side effects, that cause tremendous amounts of addiction, dependency, and we're really not making them more functional. What we're doing is, and we end up making them zombies, where they're not able to hold down a full-time job and be able to interact with their families in a meaningful way. So this is how I first became interested in studying marijuana for PTSD, because my own veterans in my practice started slowly disclosing to me that they were using marijuana, and they claimed that they were using it successfully to manage their PTSD, and I was very skeptical. I'm trained in a really conservative medical model where I don't covet anything except FDA-approved medicine. So I was dubious, and they kept sharing their stories with me, and I kept dismissing them and creating a very, really judgmental environment. But they continued to try to teach me, and slowly I couldn't ignore this anymore, because eventually the weight of all these veteran stories and their family members who would corroborate that they got their loved one back, that this plant saved their life. I'm still skeptical. I'm not sold on this, but I am committed to studying this plant in a rigorous way, and that's all I'm proposing. So these are the things that the veteran community was arguing that marijuana helped them with, right? All these symptoms listed here. And it seemed really implausible that one medicine, one intervention could treat this entire list of symptoms, but that's what they're claiming. And I was stunned by this, because I know, psychiatry, we haven't come very far, and what happens is we still treat each target symptom with a different prescription medicine. So that's how these patients get stuck on giant amounts of medicine. The vets call it the combat cocktail, right? They come back and they get put on relentless amounts of medicine to try to treat what is a very complex condition, right? You think about the whole constellation of PTSD symptoms. You can imagine why these guys end up on 10 different meds. But this was finally what persuaded me, was I started teaching myself about the endocannabinoid system, because I had never learned about this system. And you think about in medical school, in residency training, there is no discussion about this most important homeostatic mechanism. So even though the endocannabinoid system was uncovered by Raphael Meshulam, the Israeli scientist, in the 80s, and continued to be elucidated throughout the 90s, and continues to have extremely compelling evidence to support its existence, the fact is that no medical school curriculum teaches us that every human body has an endocannabinoid system, and it is the most vital homeostatic mechanism controlling all of these different human body processes. We never learn about that. So we have to teach ourselves. So that's why when you see a lot of resistance from the medical community, that's why. They don't perceive marijuana as medicine because we're not even taught this basic system exists. So this is part of what we're working on in our study, right? So we always talk about the two major cannabinoids in the whole plant marijuana. There's a lot of discussion about THC and CBD or cannabidiol, but the truth is that this plant is much more complex than that. And NIDA actually just came out with new cannabinoids. Now they have counted over 130 different phytocannabinoids in the plant that all interact together synergistically to create what we now describe as the entourage effect. So that is why it's so tough to mimic the efficacy of whole plant marijuana when you see efforts from the pharmaceutical companies to isolate a specific cannabinoid. Like you look at Marinol, the pill form of THC. That is, they've taken one cannabinoid out of 130 plus in the plant, and they've isolated it chemically and turned it into a pill. And the truth is that medicine is terribly disappointing, and that for any of you who prescribe Marinol, you would probably agree with me that most patients don't respond to it. A lot of patients have terrible side effects from it, because when you take the natural balance out that the God-given plant offers, you end up with something that is not optimal. And so that's what we do have preclinical studies suggesting that cannabinoids do reduce fear, and preclinical meaning in mice and rats. So we do have that data, and it was found comparable to antidepressant imipramine. So what happened was, at that point, the FDA allowed us with our study to enter the process at phase 2. So this is what our study, I'll show you a little bit more about this. So we were really interested in CBD, and that's a big part of our hypothesis with the study. We believe that marijuana that's rich in cannabidiol could be more beneficial for PTSD, but again, it all remains to be tested because we don't know. This is a theory that a lot of vets have discounted. Many vets feel that CBD-rich marijuana has not been helpful for them, but we really want to understand that. And so we've actually picked two strains, two arms of the study that are CBD-rich marijuana in order to hopefully uncover more information about what role CBD plays in managing PTSD, if any. So now then the other thing that's really important, I think a lot of you have read literature about the anti-inflammatory action of whole plant marijuana. And so we hope to start to quantify that. We're working with Dr. Chris Lowry. He's one of my co-investigators at UC Boulder. So he's developed these biomarkers to help us measure the whatever anti-inflammatory action occurs from marijuana. Hopefully we'll be able to document that if it does exist. So then let's take a look here. So basically, we're interested in whole plant marijuana much firmly over isolating individual cannabinoids. There's plenty of pharmaceutical companies that are doing this work, and so they don't need us for that. We want to look at whole plant marijuana, so that's why we're so committed to this. Now, this was actually a painting done by one of the veterans in the U.S., and we keep using this because I think it's such an accurate depiction of what veterans are reporting. so many of these vets, describe this situation where they feel like they're drowning in pills and pill bottles, and they discover marijuana for the first time and they feel like this was life-saving for them. So I think this is a really important illustration that really sums up the veterans' experience in many cases. And of course, many of the vets have reported that they've been able to walk away from a lot of their highly addictive prescriptions from the VA by using marijuana alone. So that's part of why I'm so intrigued by this. So again, MAPS is my sponsor. MAPS is a nonprofit based out of Santa Cruz, and they are, they've been sponsoring me from back in 2010 when we first submitted the study design to the FDA. And they've been helping me navigate this process, which has been really relentless. I mean, it is very clear that the US government has been systematically impeding marijuana efficacy research in this country. And our study is a prime example of how that happens. So I'm going to show you a glimpse of that here. But first of all, let me actually go into, so just so you know, so we're looking at 76 military veterans with treatment-resistant PTSD, right? So that means they have to have failed medication or psychotherapy or both in order to be eligible to be screened for the study. And here is, this is basically a triple-blind study, so that's really important. We wanted to try to eliminate any human bias by making sure that everyone was blinded to what they're getting. So the study subjects have no idea what they're getting. The independent raters will not know what any of the subjects are receiving, and of course the physician investigators will also be blinded. And we're going to be looking at both the safety and efficacy of marijuana in the same study. That's unique because typically the research that's allowed to happen in the US is only looking at safety, right? You're only looking at harmful side effects of marijuana and addiction potential of marijuana. Finally, we've been green-lighted to look at both safety and efficacy in the same study. And let's see here. So let me jump to the next one here. So yeah, I talked about the blinding, and now I'm going to talk about how the treatment arms are set up, right? So we are going to be looking at 4 different phenotypes of whole plant marijuana, and with the smoking delivery method. So unfortunately, even though I'm highly opposed to smoking, and I actually spent 10 years of my life trying to pass the Smoke-Free Workplace Act in Arizona, which we finally got, the cruel irony now of being the PI on a smoking study is unbelievable to me. But unfortunately, this is what, we've selected this purposely because we wanted to do a real world study. We wanted to understand what veterans are doing day to day in their own homes, and that's what they do. They smoke. Most of them are not using edibles or vaporizing, so we're trying to mimic what happens in the real world. As you can see here, we're going to be looking at these 4 different treatment arms. So we have one strain of marijuana that's high in THC with almost no other cannabinoids. This is a strain that NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, is very skilled at growing. No problem there. We're looking at a placebo control, right? So the NIDA takes the marijuana that they grow and they alcohol wash it, they leach out all the cannabinoids. So it's basically 0% THC and virtually no other cannabinoids in the plant. So we do have a placebo control. Then we've got a high CBD strain, so it's about 12% cannabidiol with no other cannabinoids, or at least they say under 1%. So we'll see what that is. Of course, we intend to do secondary testing on all of the marijuana study drug we get from NIDA, so we'll see what that pans out to be. And then the 4th strain is a 1-to-1 ratio of 12% THC, 12% CBD. This is the one that has really confounded the federal government. NIDA has not been able to produce this strain, and we've been waiting now 16 months for marijuana study drug, and we still don't have access to it. We have no timeline for when it will arrive, and that's the sad reality of trying to conduct marijuana research in this country. Is marijuana is the only Schedule I drug that has only a single production source. So all the other drugs in Schedule I, You can buy them from any research lab in the country. It's really a bizarre situation because I would argue that marijuana is one of the least toxic drugs in Schedule 1, and yet it has the most onerous barriers to research. So when I study heroin or LSD or MDMA, I can purchase study drug for LSD from any lab in the country. But only marijuana has to deal with this NIDA monopoly. So this has been a tough situation. And of course, there's going to be different stages to the study. During stage 1, they'll be randomized into one strain. During stage 2, they'll be re-randomized into a second strain. Stage 1 is going to look like this. Basically, they'll get randomized onto one of those 4 strains. Then they will take the study drug home with them, and they will self-titrate. That's a really controversial piece of this study, because a lot of the folks reviewing this initially were very scared about veterans being allowed to take home marijuana and being able to dose what they need. But again, we're striving for a real world study, and this is what veterans do each day. They figure out how much marijuana they need. They titrate or adjust the dose to the exact amount to target their therapeutic needs, and then they stop. Most of my vets in my practice aren't striving to get high. They're just striving to be functional. So that's what this is going to do. They're going to take as much as they need each day, up to 2 grams a day. They can't exceed that. And then at the end of the week, they come back. They're required to bring all of their unused marijuana back. We weigh it and decide, and document that. And then if they meet all the other criteria, if there's clear evidence that they have complied with the protocol, they have to videotape all of their sessions. Let me see if I have that here. No, I don't. I'll show you that later. But they have to videotape all of their drug delivery, so we verify that they're not diverting it to friends and family. And then once they go through this entire battery of tests each week, then we can issue another week's supply. After their 3 weeks of home self-titration, they are cut off the study drugs. There's 2 weeks of pure abstinence, where we continue to monitor them aggressively, checking blood cannabidiol levels, checking their CAP scores to see what's happening with their PTSD, with their suicidal thinking, all of those elements. And then, of course, after their abstinence period, that's the crossover, stage 2, where they get re-randomized into a new treatment arm. So if they were on placebo during stage 1, then they actually go into an active treatment arm finally during stage 2. But if they were on, say, 12% THC during stage 1, they might get re-randomized in stage 2 to a high CBD strain. And so this is going to be part of it's going to be a really interesting analysis later to see how all this data coordinates. And then, of course, again, same model where after 3 weeks of home self-titration, they get cut off the study drug for 2 full weeks, and we continue to evaluate them. And then in stage 3, basically they're given back their unused marijuana at that point. If they want it, some may not, may choose not to do that. And then at that point, we start a process, basically a 6-month follow-up, where we start to evaluate what decisions they make at this point. Do they decide to stay on cannabis by applying to their state medical marijuana program to get an ID card? Do they go back to the VA and simply pursue conventional treatment? Do they end up on the streets, and end up utilizing illicit drugs? Who knows what choices they're going to make? So this is my team. I'm just going to run through this quickly. These are all folks who are extremely experienced in marijuana research. Dr. Marcel von Miller has a long, revered history in this area. He's with the Palo Alto VA. He's going to bring an incredible amount of guidance. Then we have Ryan Bandry, who's one of the top researchers in the world from Johns Hopkins. We have, let's see here, we have Dr. Paula Riggs. Many of you guys may know, she's a child psychiatrist here at UC Denver Medical School. She's terrific. She is in charge, not only of PI, she's in charge of data integrity, which is so important for this study. We want to make sure that this data is unassailable. This is a huge investment from the state of Colorado, and we're committed to making sure that this data is impeccable. So excited to work with her. She's got tons of experience running clinical trials, drug development trials. And then, of course, Amy is our, the director of clinical research over at MAPS, my sponsor. And she also has a long history of doing pharma-based clinical trials, and she'll bring also a wealth of knowledge. I just want to give you a glimpse. This isn't even all the testing we're doing, but this explains some of the rigor that is involved in this. So our primary outcome measure is the CAPS scale, right? The clinician-administered PTSD scale is the gold standard for evaluating severity of PTSD. It's the same measurement tool used by the FDA to approve Zoloft and Paxil and any new meds that attempt to come on the market for PTSD. The good thing about CAPS is these are certified independent raters. So not just anybody can just decide to administer a CAPS. They have to be exquisitely trained in order to do this scale. So we're excited to have that as our primary outcome measure, but then we have all these secondary measures, right? For instance, we're going to be measuring very aggressively. Each of these participants will be given a portable sleep study to go home with, and we'll be measuring their sleep architecture. We're going to be measuring suicidality to make sure that marijuana isn't promoting suicidality. We're going to be measuring all this battery of tests each week when they come back in. So it's very intense. It's a huge commitment from these vets, and it's going to be really important to find vets that are willing to comply with this super rigorous protocol. But as you can see here, these are some of the safety and monitoring that we're going to be doing throughout this. So you can see here, this is really important to me because I am concerned about how patients, I'm concerned about documenting adverse events, and I really want to make sure, especially with the smoking delivery method, I want to be able to capture that. And so we're going to be putting these patients through, let's see if they have that here. Did we talk about the 4-hour safety session here? Let's see. Well, basically, let me tell you. So what happens is when the patients first are enrolled in the study, they're required to be exposed to marijuana study drug in a 4-hour safety session where we actually administer the marijuana via pipe. And they're allowed to smoke for 15 minutes straight, and then we monitor them for 4 hours after that to document any adverse events or basic side effects. And then we do that on 2 consecutive days. And so these patients then will, once they're randomized into a specific strain, then they'll be exposed to that in front of us. And if they successfully get through those 2 sessions, then they're finally allowed to take home study drug with them. And of course, this is how we recruit patients. So any of you guys, hopefully, finally the federal government will be able to provide the marijuana study drug that we've been so eagerly waiting for, and we'll be able to start screening patients possibly as early as this fall. So if you have veterans who you think might be interested, we're really expecting to need to screen hundreds and hundreds of military vets in order to find those optimal 76 that meet all of the pages of inclusion and exclusion criteria. It's going to be tough.